Zodiac Alchemy. 12 Tales of Cosmic Connection. Cancer. Tale 4. The Lighthouse Keeper's Secret. A story of Cancer. Hood Eloquence. Where the streets meet the literature. The sea does not reward those who are too anxious, too greedy, or too impatient. One should lie empty, open, choiceless as a beach, waiting for a gift from the sea. And Maura Lindbergh. Some people carry their wounds so long. They start to believe the wounds are who they are. Hood Eloquence. A note on the series. The Zodiac Alchemy series is 12 tales of cosmic connection, one for each sign, one for each soul blueprint the universe has written. These are not simple love stories. They are excavations. Each sign carries a superpower, a wound, and a way of loving that is entirely its own. In this series, those powers are tested, broken open, and ultimately redeemed. Tale 4 belongs to Cancer. Cancer. The Cancer native loves like a lighthouse, constant, faithful, burning through the dark so others can find their way home. But what happens when the lighthouse keeper's own storm arrives? What happens when the one who holds everyone else together begins to drown? This is Maren's story. And Caspian's. And perhaps, if you have ever loved someone too broken to accept love, this is yours. Part 1. The Storm That Was Coming. Chapter 1. What the Harbor Knows. 3 days before Hurricane Nadia made landfall, the harbor smelled like iron and old prayers. The morning Maren Davis drove down to Pelican Narrows. The sky was the color of a bruise that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. She had the windows down despite the September humidity, her left hand trailing in the thick coastal air while Paula's voice crackled through the car's Bluetooth like a woman who had already made up her mind for both of them. "You are not going down there for a vacation, Maren Leigh. I need you to understand that." Paula's voice carried the particular authority of a woman who harvested rosemary at midnight and had once talked a man down from a rooftop using nothing but chamomile tea and eye contact. Thomas Branch is 81 years old and his nephew just showed up looking like he's been fighting the sea and losing. Thomas can't, he won't ask for help. "You know how those Branch men are." "I know how most men are," Maren said. "His nephew is different." "They all are." Maren. She turned off Route 17 onto the smaller coastal road, the tires finding the rhythm of old asphalt, the marsh grass bowing on both sides like something genuflecting. "I'll stay 3 days, Paula. I'll check on Thomas, I'll stock his kitchen, I'll make sure the nephew isn't actively a danger to himself or others, and then I'm coming home." A pause. Long enough to mean something. "His name is Caspian," Paula said finally. "He lost 8 men off the coast of Cape Verde 2 years ago. Freighter accident. He was the captain. He's been on the water ever since, won't stay on land more than a week at a time. Thomas says he showed up 4 days ago looking hollowed out. Thomas is scared." Maren let that sit in the car with her for a mile. "Cape Verde," she said. "Cape Verde." The marsh gave way to the open Atlantic, gray and enormous, and the lighthouse rose at the far end of the point like a white finger pressed to the sky, patient, deliberate, broadcasting its single message into the dark. "I am here. I am still here. Text me when you arrive," Paula said. And Maren. Don't fix him. Just be there. You know the difference." Maren did know the difference. It was the whole of what she had spent her adult life learning, the distance between a healer and a rescuer, between presence and possession, between holding space and filling it with yourself. She knew the difference the way she knew the tide tables, not from reading them, but from having been caught out by the water one too many times as a girl. She pulled off the road beside a weathered sign that read Branch Point Lighthouse, "No trespassing," which had never stopped anyone in 40 years, and sat for a moment with the engine running. The storm was 3 days out. The radio had been talking about Nadia all week. The way they talked about her suggested she was the kind of woman who did not negotiate. Maren understood something about that. She cut the engine, pulled her bag from the back seat, and walked toward the lighthouse in the way she walked toward everything difficult, steadily, without hurry, with her eyes open. Thomas Branch answered the door before she knocked. He was a small, sea-leathered man with white hair the texture of sea oats and eyes the precise blue of shallow Gulf water. He looked at her with the frankness of the very old and the very relieved, and he said, without preamble, "Paula called ahead. Come in before the wind picks up." The lighthouse kitchen was everything a lighthouse kitchen ought to be, low-ceilinged, wool-warm, smelling of salt and wood smoke, and something spiced simmering on the back burner. Lanterns hung in the windows, not for decoration but in the old way, the practical way, the way of people who had never fully trusted electricity. The table was scarred oak. The chairs were mismatched. The whole room had the specific gravity of a place that had held a great deal of living. "He's down at the dock," Thomas said, moving to the stove with the careful deliberateness of a man who had learned to make peace with his body's new limitations. "Been down there since first light. Won't come up for breakfast." "How long has he been here?" 4 days. Eats when I put it in front of him. Sleeps, I don't know if he sleeps. I hear him moving in the night. Thomas poured a mug of something that smelled of cinnamon and black pepper and set it on the table in front of her. He's planning to sail before the storm. Maren looked at him over the mug. Into it. He says he knows a route around. I say. Thomas lowered himself into the chair across from her. I say a man who wants to live chooses his routes differently than a man who is just going through the motions of not dying. You understand me? She did. She wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat work into her palms. Tell me about him, she said. Not the accident. Him. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, and what moved across his face was the complicated love of an old man for a young one, the love that knows it cannot protect, can only witness. He was always the one who went back, Thomas said. Every family gathering, every crisis, when anyone needed something, Caspian went back. He gave his sister his signing bonus when she needed a down payment. He flew home 3 times one year when our mother was sick. He's the kind of man who feels responsible for everything that happens within his radius. He turned his mug in his hands. Which means when something happens that he couldn't prevent, he doesn't know what to do with himself. He keeps trying to go back and fix it. But you can't. You can't go back to Cape Verde, Maren said softly. No, you can't. She looked out the kitchen window. Down past the slope of rock and seagrass, a figure stood at the end of the dock, tall, still, facing the water. Even from this distance, he had the quality of something under enormous pressure, the stillness not of peace, but of a man holding himself very carefully together. The storm was 3 days out. She had 3 days. Chapter 2, The Man at the End of the Dock. He didn't hear her coming. Or if he did, he didn't turn. Maren had known people like that, people who had trained themselves out of the instinct to turn toward sound, toward warmth, toward the approach of another person. It was the particular discipline of someone who had decided, at some cellular level, that connection was a liability. She stopped a few feet away and looked where he was looking, out at the Atlantic, which was beginning to show its intention. The swells were longer and slower than they had been that morning, the water developing that dark, deliberate muscle that meant weather was organizing itself at a distance. Hurricanes 3 days out, she said. He turned then. Not quickly, the way a man turns when he's decided to let something in, finally, because there is nowhere left to go. Caspian Branch was a large man made larger by whatever he was carrying. He had a face that had been handsome once and was still striking, strong jaw, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to arrange itself into anything casual, eyes the specific dark gray of deep water. He wore a canvas jacket over a thermal shirt and his hands, she noticed, were always slightly open, slightly ready, the way sailors' hands are, prepared to grab a line, to brace, to hold. He looked at her the way he had probably looked at squalls for 20 years, assessing, patient, not afraid, but alert to the particular quality of what was coming. Thomas's company, he said. Maren Davis. I'm a friend of Paula Hicks. Something moved in his face, the slight adjustment of a man calibrating new information. Paula sent you. Paula suggested I visit. I make my own decisions. He looked back at the water. I'm not a project, Miss Davis. No, she agreed. You're a man standing on a dock looking at a storm like it owes you something. That's its own category. A beat. Something shifted in the set of his shoulders, not quite surprise, not quite amusement, but the involuntary response of a man who had not expected to be seen accurately. You sail, he asked. I know water. I grew up low country. She moved to stand beside him, not close enough to crowd, close enough to be present. There's a difference between knowing water and having a death wish, though. You know that. I don't have a death wish. Okay. I have a route. Okay. He turned to look at her again, and this time what she saw in his face was the particular frustration of a man whose defenses had been designed for frontal assault, for argument, for pity, for the well-meaning people who would tell him he was wrong. She was not arguing. She was not pitying. She was simply standing next to him, looking at the same water, breathing the same salt air. It confused him. She could see it confusing him. Thomas made tea, she said. Cinnamon and black pepper. Tastes like someone's grandmother decided to be aggressive about it. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. She filed it away. I have charts to review, he said. I'll be in the kitchen. She walked back up the dock without looking over her shoulder. She had learned that too, over the years, the discipline of the open hand, the invitation that doesn't demand a response. You offered the door. You didn't stand in it. Behind her, she heard his boots on the dock planking after a moment's pause. He followed. The kitchen had a way of doing things to people. Maren had observed this about certain rooms, the way they held accumulated warmth and familiarity like a physical substance, the way they made the body remember what the mind had been trying to forget. Thomas's kitchen was one of those rooms. It smelled of decades of good meals and the specific kind of quiet that only settles into a space where people have sat together without needing to perform. Caspian came in and filled it differently than Thomas did. Thomas moved through the kitchen like a man who belonged to it. Caspian moved through it like a man who was trying to remember how to belong anywhere. He sat across from Maren at the scarred oak table and accepted the mug Thomas set in front of him without comment. Thomas, wise man that he was, found something to attend to in the back of the lighthouse and left them to it. For a while they simply sat. The cinnamon and pepper tea steamed between them. Outside, the wind was beginning to find its voice low, exploratory, not yet committed. Cape Verde, Maren said. He went still. I'm not going to ask you to talk about it, she said. I just want you to know I know. So you don't have to perform not knowing what I know. He looked at her for a long time. His hands were wrapped around his mug the way hers were, not for warmth, she realized, but for something to hold. Did Paula brief you? She told me what happened. Not who you are. And you think there's a difference. I know. There's a difference. He looked down at the mug. Outside, the first serious gust moved through the seagrass with a sound like something breathing out. 8 men, he said. It was not the beginning of a story. It was the whole of a sentence he had been living inside for 2 years. Maren didn't say anything. Dean Harrison survived. The youngest one. He was 22. He stopped. Started again in a different place. The weather service missed the update. I had a window, I thought I had a window, and I made a call. Another stop. His jaw worked. I was the captain. It was my call. 8 men. He set the mug down carefully. Dean was the only one who didn't, he held on. I pulled him out myself. He's 24 now. Has a kid. Named her Lily. Maren waited. I can't, he pressed the heel of his hand to the table. I can't stop going back over it. Every variable. Every decision point. If I had waited 6 hours. If I had read the secondary forecast. If he looked up at her, and what was in his face then was so raw and undefended that she felt it like a physical thing, like the wind shifting. Dean sends me pictures of Lily. I don't know what he wants from me. He wants you to know that something survived, Maren said quietly. He's not trying to absolve you or condemn you. He just wants you to know that Lily exists. Caspian looked at her. He stopped. I know, she said. It's harder than condemnation. He was quiet for a long time. The wind picked up again. Thomas came back through the kitchen to check the lanterns in the windows, saying nothing, touching Caspian's shoulder once as he passed, the brief, communicative silence of men who have loved each other for a long time. When Thomas had gone back upstairs, Caspian looked at Maren across the table with the expression of a man who had not let anyone this close in a very long time and wasn't sure how it had happened. Why are you still sitting here? He asked. Not unkindly. Genuinely curious. Because you haven't told me to leave. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he picked up his mug. The tea's better when it cools a little, he said. I know. They sat together in Thomas's kitchen while the storm organized itself at a distance, and neither of them needed to say anything more. Chapter 3. What the Night Carries. The first night, Maren slept in Thomas's spare room and listened to Caspian walk. He moved through the lighthouse the way sailors moved through ships, not pacing, not restless in the anxious sense, but with the quiet systematic patrol of a man whose body was still on watch. She heard him on the stairs, in the lantern room, down in the kitchen. She heard him outside once, briefly, and then coming back in. The door closing without sound, his boots on the stone floor. She lay in the dark and did not go to him. This was the work, not the going, but the staying still. Not the reaching, but the holding of herself open like a room with its lights on, letting him move through his darkness in his own way, knowing the light was there when he was ready. She heard him, around 3 in the morning, settle into a chair in the kitchen below her. She heard the soft knock of a mug on the table. And then silence, not the walking silence, but the settled silence, the kind that meant a body had finally consented to be still. She closed her eyes. In the morning he was at the kitchen table again when she came down, this time with charts spread across the oak surface and a coffee that had gone cold at his elbow. He looked up when she came in, a reflexive thing, quickly managed, but she caught the quality of it, not the guard going up, but the moment before the guard went up. The unguarded fraction of a second when he looked at her, and something in his face was simply glad. She stored that too. Coffee, she said. Yours has died. It's fine. It's not fine, it's cold. She moved to the stove. Where does Thomas keep the real coffee? This, she held up the jar on the counter. This is the grocery store version. He almost smiled. Top cabinet, left. He has a pour-over he only uses for company. I'm company. Apparently. She made the coffee the way Paula had taught her, slow, attentive, the water at the right temperature, the grind fresh. She brought 2 cups to the table and moved his charts aside to set them down without asking permission. He watched this with the expression of a man recalibrating. Storm track changed overnight, he said, when she had sat down. I saw. She had checked her phone at 5 a.m. It moved north. You're going to say your window is tighter now. It is. It is, and you're going anyway. He looked at his cup. Then at her. I have a delivery contract. Cargo out of Nassau through the Gulf. Caspian. She said it the way she said the hard things quietly, without accusation. You don't need me to tell you the cargo isn't why. His jaw tightened. I need to be moving, he said. The first honest thing he'd said that wasn't about the past. When I'm moving I can, he stopped. Started again. When I'm sailing I know exactly what I'm responsible for. I know the radius. I know the variables. On land everything is, he opened his hand against the table. Diffuse. Diffuse, she repeated. I don't know what to do with myself on land. You're doing it right now. He looked at her. Sitting still. Talking. Drinking coffee that isn't terrible. She wrapped both hands around her cup. You're doing it, and you haven't fallen apart. It's been 36 hours. It's been 36 hours, she agreed. That's 36 hours more than you thought you could manage. The wind tested the kitchen window. Outside, the Atlantic had gone the color of old pewter, deep and patient and immense. Caspian looked at his charts, then at the window, then at her. Why do you do this? He asked. The healing work. The going toward the hurt people. She considered how honest to be. Decided on all the way. Because I was a hurt person and someone came toward me, she said. Not to fix me. Just to not leave. She looked at her cup. My mother had a saying, the loneliest sound in the world is the door closing on someone who needed you to stay. I heard that sound a lot when I was young. I decided it wasn't one I wanted to be responsible for. He was quiet for a while. Your mother was wise, he said finally. She was. She was also the one closing the door, usually. It took me a long time to understand that the people who teach you the most important lessons are sometimes teaching you by negative example. Something in his face opened a little further. The specific opening that happens when a person realizes they have been recognized, not the wounds, not the history, but the particular shape of the mind that has built something meaningful from damage. Dean named his daughter Lily, he said, not a non sequitur, though it sounded like one. His mother's name was Lily. She died when he was 8. He told me that. On the voyage. The one before. Maren waited. He named her for someone he lost, Caspian said slowly. And he sent me the pictures. His voice had changed lower, more careful. Because he knows what it is to carry a loss forward instead of just, he stopped. Pressed his lips together. Instead of just carrying it down. Maren didn't speak. He looked up at her. He's not trying to forgive me, he said. He's trying to show me how. Yes, she said. Simply. Without elaboration. He looked out the window for a long time. The sky had lowered overnight, pressing down on the water, and the lighthouse beams swept through it at intervals, patient and faithful and entirely without expectation. I need to think, he said. Okay. I'm not, he looked at her. I'm not saying I'm not going. I know. I'm saying I need to think. Caspian. She rose and took her cup to the window. I'm not going to block the door. I'm not going to beg you to stay. What you do with your ship and your grief is your business. She turned. But I'm going to be here when you think. And if you decide to go, I'm going to stand on that dock and watch you leave with the clearest eyes I have, so that if you come back, when you come back, you know what you're coming back to. He stared at her. What am I coming back to? He asked. Quiet. Not rhetorical. She looked at him for a long moment, the full weight of her attention, unhurried, unafraid. Someone who sees you, she said. All of you. Not just the wreck. He didn't go out to the dock that evening. He sat in the kitchen instead and ate the soup Maren made from what Thomas had in the pantry, black beans, smoked sausage, half an onion, enough garlic to be deliberate about it. And he ate it like a man who had not tasted anything in a long time and was just beginning to remember what food was for. Thomas ate with them and told stories about the lighthouse in the 60s, about the winters when the supply boat didn't come, and they ate what was in the cold cellar and played cards by lantern light for weeks. About the woman he had loved and lost to a different kind of sea, the inland sea of a life lived elsewhere. About how he had made his peace with the lighthouse, because the lighthouse did not require him to be more than exactly what he was, a man who kept the light on. Caspian listened to his uncle with the quality of a man hearing something he had known but needed reminding of. After dinner, Thomas went upstairs without ceremony. Outside, the wind had grown serious, and the lighthouse beam wheeled through the thickening dark with a regularity that had become, over the course of the day, quietly reassuring. Maren washed the bowls. Caspian dried them. Neither of them commented on the domesticity of it. Neither of them needed to. Tell me something about yourself that isn't sad, he said, when the last bowl was put away. She considered. I once drove 17 hours straight to see a jazz concert in New Orleans because Paula told me about it at 10 p.m. and we just left. No plan. Half a tank of gas. And? We got there. The concert had been the night before. He made the sound again, the one that was almost a laugh. It was fuller this time. We stayed anyway, she continued. Found a bar on Frenchman Street. Heard music that I am still not fully recovered from. Ate beignet at 3 in the morning and watched the city be exactly what it was, and I thought, this is what it is to be alive in the world. Not the plan. The response to the plan falling apart. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching her. The kitchen light made him look less like a man at war with himself, or maybe it was the soup, or the stories, or 36 hours of being allowed to simply exist near another person without being asked to perform recovery. "What's Frenchman Street like?" he asked. And she told him. She told him about the music leaking out of every door and window, the smell of the river 2 streets over, the way the heat in New Orleans at midnight was a living thing, the way the city held its dead, the way the sea held its, openly, without apology. As if the dead were simply part of the landscape and weren't that strange, really, when you considered it. He listened with his whole body. She noticed that about him, the quality of his attention. When he chose to give it, it was total. He didn't half listen. He didn't reach for his phone or glance away. He listened the way he probably navigated, with everything he had. "You should see New Orleans," she said finally. "You would understand it." "Why?" "Because it's a city that has been underwater," she said. "More than once. And it came back. Not the same, always a little different, a little altered, carrying the water in its bones. But back." He looked at her for a long time. "You're doing it again," he said. Not accusatory. Almost warm. "Doing what?" "Talking about something else and meaning me." She smiled. "Is it working?" A pause. The lighthouse swept the dark outside. "Maybe," he said. Part 2. The Eye of the Storm. Chapter 4. The Night Before Nadia. The second night, the storm arrived at its advance edge. Not the hurricane itself. Nadia was still a day and a half out, still organizing, still deciding the precise shape of her fury, but the outer bands, the atmospheric premonition, the way the world shrinks and thickens and goes very dark before the main event. Thomas had spent the afternoon making the lighthouse ready in the way of a man who had made lighthouses ready for 60 years, checking the backup generator, securing the exterior equipment, bringing extra wood inside, laying in provisions with the calm efficiency of long practice. Caspian had helped him without being asked, moving through the preparations with the economy of a man who was also, in his way, familiar with what it meant to batten down before weather. Maren had cooked. Not because cooking was her role, it wasn't, particularly, but because the kitchen was where she thought best, and there was thinking to be done. She made a pot of spiced rice and chicken, and a sweet potato bread from a recipe Paula had taught her, and as she cooked she felt the atmospheric pressure dropping and the wind outside moving from conversational to serious. And she thought about the man upstairs checking the lantern and the man outside securing the generator housing and the way some people were made to keep things running in the dark. They ate dinner at 6. By 8 the outer bands had arrived and the rain was coming sideways, and there was nothing to do but be inside. Thomas went to bed early. He was 81. He had seen hurricanes. He was not impressed. Caspian and Maren sat in the kitchen. The lanterns were lit, all of them, every window, because Thomas believed in light the way some people believed in prayer, practically and without ambiguity. The kitchen glowed amber and warm while the storm hammered at the glass. They had been talking for 2 hours. Not about the accident. Not about the grief or the guilt or the satellite route around Nadia's edge. They had talked about Thomas's stories. About Paula's herb garden and her convictions about feverfew and the particular stubbornness of men with water in their charts. About the low country, Maren described the marsh at low tide, the way the pluff mud smelled, the blue crabs and the language that hadn't been spoken the same way anywhere else in the world for 300 years. About his first captain, an old Jamaican man named Davis who had taught him that the sea was not something you conquered, but something you negotiated with. About the fact that he hadn't laughed, really laughed, not the reflexive social kind, in over a year. "What made you laugh before?" she asked. "When you still were." He thought about it. Actually thought about it, which she appreciated. "My sister's kid," he said. "Jada. She's 7 now, she was 5 when she used to call me Cap Cap, and she'd explain things to me very seriously. Like I didn't know how things worked. She explained gravity to me once. For about 15 minutes. He paused. She wasn't wrong, technically. She just had some additions. What kind of additions? She believed. Gravity worked harder on sad people. That's why they looked heavier to her. She said she could always tell when a grown-up was sad because they looked like they were getting pulled down. Maren felt the truth of that move through her like weather. "She sounds like a scientist," she said. "She sounds like she's been watching too many adults try to hold themselves together," he said. He smiled, the real one, the one she'd been waiting for, and it changed his face entirely. Made him look like the man he had been before the water took something from him. Made him look, briefly, like someone who knew how to come home. She looked at him with the full candor of a woman who had learned not to look away from the moments that mattered. He caught her looking. The kitchen was warm. The rain was relentless. The lanterns were burning. "Maren," he said. Her name in his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it yet, deliberate, almost careful, like a man lifting something he wasn't sure he had the right to hold. "Don't say you're not worth it," she said quietly. "I'll know you're lying." He made it sound like air leaving a space it had been compressed in for a long time. "I was going to say thank you," he said. "Oh, a beat. You're welcome." I was also going to say, he stopped, turned his mug in his hands. I was going to say that I don't know what this is. And I'm not a man who handles not knowing well. But I don't want it to stop. The rain hammered the windows. Maren reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not a complex gesture. Not weighted with strategy or intention. Simply, her hand on his, steady and warm, the most fundamental language available. He looked at her hand. Then at her face. Something in his expression went through a complete revolution. The walled thing, the defended thing, the thing that had been braced against entry since before she arrived, and what came through on the other side was not vulnerability exactly, but permission. The deliberate, chosen permission of a man who had decided, in this specific moment, to put down what he'd been carrying long enough to feel what was in his hands. His hand turned under hers. His fingers closed. I have a condition, she said softly. Name it. You eat breakfast tomorrow. You don't go out to the dock at 5 a.m. You have coffee with me, and you look at the storm track together, and you let me be next to you while you make whatever decision you make. She held his gaze. Not to influence it. Not to fix it. Just next to you. He was quiet for a long time. That's a significant condition, he said at last. Yes. Most people want, he stopped. I know what most people want, she said. I want something different. What do you want? She looked at him steadily, not performing certainty, not manufacturing warmth, but offering the full honest weight of what she actually saw when she looked at him. I want you to stay long enough to find out who you are when you're not punishing yourself, she said. I think that person is remarkable. I think you've earned the right to meet him. The lighthouse beam swept through the dark outside, wheeling and faithful. Caspian Branch, for the first time in 2 years, did not have an answer. He sat in that kitchen with a woman's hand warm over his and the storm raging just outside the glass and something shifting in his chest, the slow, irresistible movement of something that has been held in place too long and finally, begins to settle into a different shape. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She understood. Chapter 5. The Language of Warmth. The storm found its full voice around midnight. Nadia's outer edge was not the hurricane herself, but she was not polite about it. The rain had gone horizontal. The wind was finding the seams of the old lighthouse and testing them, and the whole building was making the low, structural sound of something that had weathered this before and intended to weather it again. Thomas had woken once, checked the generator, confirmed the backup lantern in the tower was running, and gone back to bed with the equanimity of a man who was one with his lighthouse and knew it would hold. Caspian and Maren had moved from the kitchen to the sitting room without deciding to. It happened the way good things often happened, through proximity and warmth and the simple logic of a couch with a wool blanket near the fireplace when the temperature had dropped. She had the blanket. He had the fire. Strictly speaking. The first time he reached for her it was not a reach at all, it was the slow closing of a space that had been diminishing for 2 days. They were sitting close on the old settee, his shoulder against hers, both facing the fire, and when she turned her head to say something the word didn't come because he was already there, his face near hers. And neither of them moved for a moment that lasted longer than a moment. He looked at her the way he had looked at the storm on the first day, with the patient, undivided attention of a man who did not take what he observed lightly. I've been alone for a long time, he said. Quietly. Not explaining, just naming. The way you name a thing before you put it down. I know. I don't know how to, he stopped. His jaw worked. I don't know how to be with someone who isn't afraid of what's in me. I'm not afraid of grief, she said. I've sat with worse. This isn't just grief. I know what it is. She held his gaze. You think loving you is a risk. You're trying to tell me before I decide. Yes, Caspian. She turned toward him fully, the blanket falling from her shoulder, the fire making moving amber light across both their faces. I am a low-country woman who drove to New Orleans on half a tank of gas. I know about risk. And then he kissed her. Not the way a man kisses when he is trying to prove something or take something or arrive somewhere. The way a man kisses when he is surrendering to something he has been resisting for too long, with the specific quality of yielding, of coming down from height, of the body remembering before the mind can catch up. She kissed him back with the patience she brought to everything, not passive, but deeply present, anchored in the moment with the full weight of her attention. Her hand found his jaw, and she felt him exhale against her, the long, shuddering breath of something releasing its grip. The fire moved. The storm raged past the glass. He pulled back after a moment and pressed his forehead to hers and stayed there, breathing, and she felt the warmth of him against her skin and the specific weight of a man who was choosing, deliberately, to be still. Stay with me, he said. Low. Asking. I'm here, she said. I mean, he lifted his head. Looked at her with the open, stripped-down expression of a man who had run out of defensive options and found, on the other side of them, something cleaner. I mean, I want you close. Tonight. While the storm, he stopped. Looked at the fire. I don't sleep well. I know. I hear you walking. He turned back to her. And you didn't come down. It wasn't time. Something in his face went soft, not weak, not diminished, but the specific softness of a man who has spent a very long time in armor and has been, at last, correctly understood. "Is it time now?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She will remember that night the way you remember the rooms where your life changed, not photographically, but atmospherically. The smell of the wood smoke and the wool blanket. The sound of the storm pressing against the windows with its huge, indifferent want. The quality of the firelight on his face when he finally allowed himself to be still. He was not easy in his body, even there, even with her. He had the wariness of a man who had learned that stillness could be interrupted, that warmth could be withdrawn, that the cost of letting yourself rest was that you had to live with having rested. She understood that too. She moved her hands across his back the way she moved through any tense and defended space, with patience, without demand, reading what was needed and providing it without announcement. His breath changed. The long-held tension in his shoulders released degree by careful degree, the way a tide recedes, not all at once, but in the patient, inevitable language of water finding its level. She felt the exact moment he stopped bracing. It was not dramatic. It was the quietest possible form of transformation. A man who had been coiled against the world simply, in one long exhalation, stopped. Let the weight redistribute. Let the muscles remember that they were allowed, sometimes, not to be ready. He held her like the last thing tethering him to the world. She let herself be held that way, not diminished by it, not subsumed by it, but present in it. There was a difference between being someone's anchor and being someone's chain. She had always known the difference. Tonight she was the anchor, and she was glad of it, and the gladness was clean. He was deliberate in his tenderness, a man who had been careful with everything in life except himself, now learning, slowly, what it felt like to turn that same careful attention inward and outward at once. His hands in her hair. His voice low against her skin, saying her name the way a man says a word he is learning to trust. The storm outside pressed its full weight against the lighthouse walls, and the walls held, and inside, in the fire-lit sitting room, two people negotiated the ancient, terrifying act of letting themselves be known. She told him, with her hands and her silence and the way she looked at him without flinching, "I see what is in you, and I am not leaving." He received it the only way a man like Caspian Branch could receive anything that mattered, slowly, with his whole body, and with the expression of someone who had long since stopped expecting to be given something he didn't have to fight for. They talked for a while in the firelit dark, low voices, unhurried. He told her about his sister in Atlanta and Jada's increasingly sophisticated theories about how the universe worked. She told him about the low country in spring, and the way the dogwood came in all at once like the land had been saving up. He told her, haltingly, about the day they found the survivors and the ones they didn't find. She held him through it, not trying to fix the story, not reaching for the comfort words that would have been inadequate, just present, her hand against his chest where his heart was working hard against the memory. "You saved Dean," she said, when he had finished. "I put Dean in danger." "Both," she said. "You did both. And so did the weather service, and so did the shipping company that put you on that route, and so did every decision in the chain that put you in that position. You are one thread, Caspian. Not the whole cloth." He was quiet. "Dean is raising Lily," she said softly. "Lily, who was named for the woman he lost. And he is sending you pictures because he knows something you don't, which is that survival is not a betrayal of the ones who didn't make it. It's the continuation of the argument that they mattered. That their lives had weight. That the world they left behind is worth staying in." She felt him breathe. Felt his chest expand and contract against her. "I have been trying to go back," he said, barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking if I stay on the water, if I keep going back to that part of the ocean, I'll find what you lost." "Yes. And you can't." "No," a long pause. "No, you can't. The water holds what it takes," she said. "That's the agreement. That's always been the agreement. What you can do," she pressed her palm flat against his chest. "What you can do is let what it didn't take matter." He was very still. Outside, Nadia howled and spent herself against the lighthouse walls, and the walls held, and the light in the tower kept turning. Sometime in the deep hours before dawn, Caspian Branch fell asleep. Maren felt it happen, the final, complete release of a man who had not permitted himself to rest in a very long time, and she stayed exactly where she was and kept her hand over his heart and listened to him breathe until her own eyes closed. The fire burned down. The storm raged on. The lighthouse kept its light. Part 3. After the storm, the reckoning. Chapter 6. The morning after Nadia. Nadia moved on by 4 a.m. She left the coast the way she had arrived, without apology, without looking back, dragging a new arrangement of the shoreline behind her and leaving the sky scoured clean. By 6 the light was crystalline and merciless, the kind of post-storm light that made everything look exactly as it was. Caspian woke first. He lay still for a moment in the sitting room, disoriented in the specific way of a man whose body had slept longer and more deeply than he expected. The fire had gone out sometime in the night. The room was cool and still. The light through the windows was the thin gold of very early morning. Maren was asleep against his shoulder. He looked at her for a long time. He looked at her the way he had not looked at anything or anyone in 2 years, with the full, careful attention of a man who had been given something and was only now, in the quiet aftermath, beginning to understand its weight. She was still in sleep, her face returned to its own language, the watchfulness and the deliberateness gone, and in their place something simpler and more private. He thought about 8 men. He thought about Dean sending him pictures of Lily with a caption that said only her weight and her name, and once, just once, "She has your eyes," which was Dean's idea of a joke, and also, Caspian understood now, something more than a joke. Dean's way of tying Caspian into a lineage he was trying to sever himself from. He thought about what Maren had said, survival is not a betrayal. It is the continuation of the argument. He reached for his phone. He opened Dean's contact. He wrote, "She looks like her grandmother. You did good, Harrison. Be well." He put the phone down. He did not feel better. He felt something more complicated than better, the specific feeling of a man who has lifted something heavy for so long that when he finally sets it down, the muscles still hold the shape of the weight, and it takes time for them to remember how to carry themselves differently. But he had set it down. Some portion of it. Enough. Maren stirred. She opened her eyes and looked at him with the directness she brought to everything, no performance of waking up, no gradual orientation, just eyes open, present, seeing him. "Morning," she said. "Morning. Did you sleep?" "Longer than I have in 2 years." She nodded. Accepted this without making too much of it. "The storm's gone," he said. "I know." He looked at her. "My ship is in the harbor," he said. "The weather window I had is gone," she finished. Track shifted north. "New window opens in 5 days." He almost smiled. "You checked?" "I always check the variables." He looked at her for a long, steady moment. The morning light was doing something honest to the room, showing the ash in the grate and the wool blanket pulled loose and the 2 coffee cups still on the side table from the night before. Showing everything exactly as it was. 5 days, he said slowly. "If you want to wait for the window. And if I don't take the window." She met his eyes. "Then the next series of decisions belongs to both of us. And we need to talk about that." "We could talk about it," he said. His voice was different, something in it had loosened, had found a register closer to the ground. "Over breakfast. If you were staying." Maren looked at him with everything she had. "I'll stay for breakfast," she said. "And then we'll see." It was not a promise. It was better than a promise. It was an open door, held steady by a woman who understood exactly the difference between a door and a cage, and chose, every time, to hold the door. Thomas made eggs. He made them the way he made everything, with the quiet authority of a man who had been doing it right for decades, and had no interest in doing it any other way. Scrambled with sharp cheddar and a heavy hand with the black pepper, toast from the sweet potato bread Maren had made the day before, coffee in the good pour-over. He set the table without comment, sat down, and looked at his nephew and the woman across from him with the expression of a man who had seen enough of life to know when something important had happened and was wise enough not to say so. "Storm moved fast," he said. "Yes, sir," Caspian said. The point held. "Back corner of the generator housing needs looking at. One of the brackets worked loose. I'll look at it after breakfast." Thomas nodded. Ate his eggs. After a moment he said, without looking up, "I called your sister. Told her you were here. She says Jada wants to know if you're bringing the boat up for Thanksgiving." Caspian was quiet for a beat. "I'll call her," he said. Thomas looked up then. He looked at his nephew with the clear, undramatic love of an old man who had been worried for a long time and was, this morning, less worried. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He poured more coffee and passed the bread. Chapter 7. What the Light Shows. The 5 days passed the way good days pass, not without difficulty, but with the particular quality of difficulty that moves forward rather than in circles. Caspian fixed the generator housing and 2 other things Thomas had been meaning to address for months, working with the methodical care of a man who needed his hands occupied and was no longer trying to occupy them on a ship headed into weather. Maren stayed. She had called Paula on the morning after Nadia and said, "Only, I'm going to need a few more days," and Paula had said, I know, stop explaining," and hung up. They had not made declarations. They had not made promises. They moved around each other in Thomas's lighthouse the way people move around each other when something real and necessary is happening, and they are both trying not to scare it off. She saw him call his sister on the 3rd day. She heard him laugh on the phone, the real laugh, full and sudden, Jada apparently having produced a new theory about why boats float, and she stayed in the kitchen and let herself feel the straightforward joy of it without needing to be the cause. She saw him open his phone on the 4th day and look at a photograph. She didn't ask. He showed her. Lily Harrison. 8 months old. Round-faced and dark-eyed and mid-yawn in the photo, which gave her an expression of tremendous opinion. "Dean wrote back," Caspian said. Maren waited. He said, I know you carry it. You don't have to carry it alone. There are 8 families and mine and yours and Lily's. We're all carrying it with you. That's what it means that we're still here. He looked at the phone for a long moment. He said that last year he wasn't sure he understood why he survived. He says he thinks he understands it better now. He says Lily is very clear about why he survived, she told him, apparently. In her own baby way. He says it seems obvious to her. Maren felt her eyes do something complicated. That's Dean, Caspian said softly. Yes, she said. He looked at her. I wrote him back. I told him about the lighthouse. About the storm. I told him. He stopped. I told him I might be coming home for Thanksgiving. He said to bring the boat. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He came to her then, not dramatically, just a step, and then he was close, his hand finding her face, his forehead dropping to hers in the way that had become, over the course of 5 days, their specific language. She put her hand against his chest. Felt his heart. Steady. Present. No longer running. I'm not fixed, he said. I know. I'm not going to be fixed in a week. I know that too. But I want. He stopped. His hands moved in her hair with the careful, deliberate tenderness of a man who was handling something he had decided to be worthy of. I want to try. I want to try being on land. I want to try calling my sister. I want to try, his voice lowered. I want to try being someone who comes home. She looked at him with the full, clear honesty of everything she was. Then come home, she said simply. On the 5th day, the weather window opened. Caspian stood at the harbor with Jackie Ford, the harbor master, reviewing the route and the cargo logistics and the timing with the focus of a man who was, after all, good at this, who had always been good at this. And what Maren noticed was that he moved differently than he had moved on the first day. He stood differently at the water. Not like a man looking for something he'd lost. Not like a man presenting his chest to the storm. Like a captain. Like a man who loved the sea without needing the sea to punish him. Like a man who had remembered, somewhere in the middle of a hurricane in a lighthouse kitchen, that his relationship with the ocean had always been, at its truest, a love story. Jackie Ford, who had watched ships and the men who sailed them for 50 years, looked at him and then looked at Maren and said nothing, which was its own form of endorsement. Thomas stood on the lighthouse steps. Maren stood on the dock. He kissed her at the end of the gangway, one hand at the side of her face and the other at her waist, and neither of them performing anything, neither of them making a show of it, simply, the specific, private language of 2 people who had been through something together and come out the other side altered. Nassau, he said. 6 weeks. I know the route. He pulled back and looked at her. You looked up my route. I told you. I always check the variables. Something moved across his face, the specific, quiet light of a man who has stopped expecting to be disappointed and has been proven right to stop. Maren Leigh Davis, he said. Caspian John Branch. I'll call you from Nassau. You'd better. He kissed her once more, brief, certain, and then he went up the gangway and onto the deck of his ship and gave orders in the easy shorthand of a captain at home on his vessel, and Maren stood on the dock and watched him go the way she had promised she would, with the clearest eyes she had. He was going. He was also, she knew, coming back. Not because she had fixed anything. Not because she had resolved his grief or absolved his guilt or performed the particular miracle that well-meaning people attempted on broken people. But because she had done the only thing that actually mattered. She had stayed. She had been present. She had reflected his pain back to him with enough clarity and enough warmth that he had been able to see himself in it. Not just the wreck, not just the captain of the Cape Verde passage, but the whole person, the full person. The person who laughed at Jada's theories about gravity and made soup from what was in the pantry and held a woman's hand in a lighthouse kitchen while the storm raged at the glass. She had seen him. And being seen, it turned out, was the beginning of everything. Thomas came down from the lighthouse steps and stood beside her. They watched the ship move out through the harbor mouth. Thank you, Thomas said. Maren looked at him. I didn't do anything. You stayed, he said. That's not nothing. She looked back at the water. The lighthouse beam was doing what it had always done, what it would keep doing long after today, wheeling through the clear post-storm light in its patient, faithful circuit. It did not choose who it helped. It did not require gratitude. It simply kept turning, simply kept burning, simply kept broadcasting its single message into whatever dark was present. I am here. I am still here. You can find your way. She stood there until the ship was small on the horizon, and then until it was gone, and then for a little while after that, just breathing the salt air and feeling the sun on her face. She had 3 messages from Paula. She would answer them later. For now she let herself stand in the light of the lighthouse and feel, without embarrassment or qualification, the particular satisfaction of a woman who has done the work she was made for and done it well. Cancer's gift. The lighthouse. Not the beam that pushes darkness away, but the steady, faithful, burning presence that says, you are not alone in this. I see where you are. You can find your way home. Epilogue. 6 weeks later. The call came from Nassau on a Tuesday. She was in Paula's herb garden, her hands in the dirt up to the wrists, pulling Lamb's ear with the focused satisfaction of a woman who liked to feel the work. Her phone was in her back pocket, and when it buzzed, she already knew. She had known, she thought, the way you knew certain things about certain people, with the body rather than the mind. She pressed her ear to the phone and heard the harbor sounds behind his voice, the particular harbor sounds of Nassau, warm and Caribbean and nothing like Pelican Narrows. I called Jada, he said, before she could say anything. His voice was different, still careful, still deliberate, but something underneath it had changed. The compression was different. Less like a man holding himself together and more like a man who had remembered what himself felt like. She told me she was glad I was on the water because water carries everything eventually. Maren smiled. She's not wrong, she said. No, a pause. She heard him breathe. I sat with the families of 2 of the men. Before Nassau. Flew into Lisbon, it took 5 days and he stopped. It was hard. I know. It didn't. Another stop. It didn't go the way I was afraid it would. They didn't need me to explain or justify. He was quiet for a moment. They needed to see me. Just. See that I was still here, that I was, his voice dropped. That I wasn't gone too. You weren't, she said softly. You aren't. No, something in his voice. The specific quality of a man who has arrived somewhere he had given up expecting to arrive. I'm not. Paula had materialized at the garden gate and was watching Maren with the expression of a woman who knew exactly what she was watching and was not above enjoying it. Maren turned away. Jada wants to know when you're coming, she said. Not to Atlanta. To the Lighthouse. Thomas told her about the sweet potato bread. A long pause. I'll be back in the harbor in 8 days, he said. If you're still. Caspian. Yes. I'll be at the dock. She could hear him smiling. She had never heard that before, his smile through a phone, and it was a new entry in the private catalog she'd been keeping of him. The real laugh. The moment he stopped bracing. The morning light on his face when he'd finally slept. And now this. The sound of him arriving somewhere he'd earned. 8 days, he said. 8 days, she confirmed. She hung up and stood in Paula's garden with the smell of herbs all around her and the Carolina sky doing its autumn thing overhead, going blue and gold and specific in the way of places where the seasons mean something. Paula said, from the gate, well, he's coming home, Maren said. Paula was quiet for a moment. Then, I knew it when I heard his name. Something about a branch man with water in his chart. They always come back to the shore eventually. Maren looked up at the sky. The lighthouse, 40 miles south on Pelican Narrows, was dark at this hour, unnecessary in the full afternoon sun. But she knew it was there. Knew Thomas was there, maintaining it with the quiet devotion of a man who had made the keeping of light his life's work. She thought about that. About what it meant to be the light rather than the one who needed it. About the particular loneliness and the particular fulfillment of that calling. About how sometimes the lighthouse keeper was also someone who needed to be found. About Caspian Branch, somewhere in the Atlantic now, 8 days from the harbor, making his way back. She went back to her work. She had things to do. She had a dock to be standing on in 8 days. A note on Cancer. Cancer is the 4th sign of the zodiac, ruled by the moon, the cardinal water sign, the keeper of memory and home and the tides. Cancer is the sign of the nurturer, the one who feels the room before they enter it. They are the people who make sanctuary out of ordinary rooms. They are the ones who know, without being told, that you haven't been sleeping. They are the ones who come toward the wound rather than away from it. Cancer's superpower is not sensitivity, though they are profoundly sensitive. It is emotional intelligence, the ability to feel the emotional truth of a person with a precision that bypasses language. They do not need you to explain. They already know. And what they do with what they know is something that looks, from the outside, like simply being there, but is, in fact, one of the most skilled and demanding acts a person can perform. Maren doesn't fix Caspian. She doesn't try to. She does something harder and more necessary. She stays, she sees, and she reflects his own worth back to him until he can finally see it himself. That is the Cancer gift. Not rescue. Reflection. Not the saving. The keeping of the light. To every Cancer reading this, you are the lighthouse. You always have been. This story is yours. Zodiac Alchemy, the complete series. 12 tales. 12 soul blueprints. 12 ways of loving that are entirely their own. Aries, the first fire. Taurus, the ground beneath. Gemini, 2 truths and a lie. Cancer, the lighthouse keeper's secret, you are here. Leo, the radiant ones, coming soon. Virgo, every perfect detail, coming soon. Libra, the weight of beauty, coming soon. Scorpio, what truth burns away, coming soon. Sagittarius, into the wild and bright, coming soon. Capricorn, what we build and what we become, coming soon. Aquarius, the rebel's heart, coming soon. Pisces, the dreamer shore, coming soon. Hood Eloquence. Where the streets meet the literature.